Now, one thing that I asked my investigators to look at is the chain of custody of this birth certificate document. Now, on the 22nd of April 2011, Barack Obama wrote a letter to his lawyers authorizing them to go to Hawaii and get a copy of his long-form birth certificate, in fact, 2 copies, so that they could have copies made and, among other things, put it up on the White House website, which is where this image is directly taken from. Now, then his lawyers wrote a letter, enclosing his letter, to Loretta Fuddy, who was the director of the Health Department's records section, saying, please will you allow this and let us have 2 copies, and I, Janice Corley, attorney to the President, will come and collect them. And there was no reply until Monday, the 25th of April, on which day, by some amazing coincidence, Ms. Corley presented herself in Hawaii and said, right, I would now like to collect these 2 copies. She hadn't had any reply telling her that she could have them. So we assume, I think we're entitled to assume, that a certain amount of telephone conversations had been going on before they wrote the letters asking for this, to make sure that the answer would be yes if they asked for it. So there they went to Hawaii. And here there is a very revealing press statement made by Governor Neil Abercrombie on Monday the 25th, saying what happened then. And in the presence of Ms. Fuddy, the director of the records, 2 copies were made from the bound volume. We are not told by what method they were made, but inferentially the use of language would suggest they were simply photocopies. They put the document onto a colour photocopier, pressed the button twice, 2 copies were spat out. They stuck the Hawaiian embossed seal on them, and they gave them in an envelope to Ms. Corley, the President's lawyer, together with a receipt for what we infer was $14, because the schedule of fees and charges is $10 for your first copy and $4 for each subsequent copy. And the President coughed up like a man, and that was paid, and he got his 2 copies of the birth certificate. So then Ms. Corley goes back to Washington and gets there in the afternoon of Tuesday the 26th. And then the next thing we have is a press conference at 8:24 a.m. in the morning on the 27th, at which it is revealed that copies of the document received from Hawaii were made by the press office and were handed out to journalists, and a bit later on an electronic version which appears to have been created in Adobe Illustrator and then converted to a picture definition file by using Macintosh Preview, presumably to reduce the file size down from the 10 megabytes of the high definition file that they got, down to 370 kilobytes. And it was a 370 kilobyte file that then appeared on the White House website. And I had to do a certain amount of trawling around to make sure that I got also a copy of the high definition file, so that I could examine in more detail some of the anomalies that I've shown you here. So that's the chain of custody. Now, at no point could or should anyone have used Adobe Illustrator at all. There is even some argument as to whether you can even scan a document in using Adobe Illustrator. But that shouldn't have been necessary, because all photocopiers and scanners these days are perfectly capable, if you just put the document on the scanning plate, the glass plate, you can dial in what resolution you want, what size you want, how much enlargement you want. You can even crop it around the edges if you want, so that you don't lose the definition of the central image. And then you press a button, and that electronic image will go into any computer you connect, whether wirelessly or with a line, to the photocopier. So they didn't need, at any stage, to use either Adobe Illustrator, or for that matter, Macintosh Preview. But the really puzzling thing is that if you had used, let us say, Photoshop, or Adobe Illustrator, or Adobe Acrobat, for that matter, and you start with a flat image taken from a document that you've just been handed from Hawaii, then it would only have one layer, as it's called, of data, on which the entire image will appear. Now, puzzlingly, this image on the White House website has 9, or depending on how you count them, 10 distinct layers. And these layers are odd. Because you see, you can, by scanning an image in using Photoshop, you can sometimes get a document in which layers occur. But when they occur, they have the following characteristics. First, there is always one and only one layer which has what is called 1-bit quality. It means that each pixel is defined only by one binary digit in the metadata electronically stored on the file. And that is always a black and white page. It's monochrome. And that is always the case. There's always one of those. And then there may be any number of 8-bit quality layers. And these layers are not so much superimposed on one another, as one might think. They're geographical areas of different parts of the form where they're separated out by the black. So that way the thing assembles the whole document and you can read it all. That's what you would expect. You'd expect one black and white, 1-bit layer, and a certain number, not specified, it can vary from document to document, of 8-bit color layers. That is the normal thing that happens if you use Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator. And if you're not, in fact, tampering with the document, but simply scanning it in some way, perhaps to compress the file size so you can put up a smaller file on the website, perhaps to trim off some of the security paper so that you can enlarge the image a bit to make sure you don't get a loss of it when people download it. All sorts of reasons why you might do some very elementary processing, even though they admit to not having done any. What you can't get, simply by scanning it in and not otherwise processing it, is a series of layers. In this case, 8 of these layers are of 1-bit quality, and not one of those 8 layers is black. That can only happen by deliberate, conscious, and quite time-consuming manipulation of the data. It can't happen accidentally because the computer does it that way. It is unknown for such a thing to occur. It can't occur. And likewise, there is only one color layer on the document, and that is the layer that represents the green basket weave so-called security paper, which you can buy at any stationery shop. That's how secure it is. And one single color layer representing the whole background image. Once again, that cannot occur unless the image has been constructed layer by layer artificially. But it gets worse, because the stamp that you saw on the earlier specimen by Onaka appears on an entirely separate layer, all on its own. No other data on that layer, just the stamp. And then the date stamp that goes alongside Onaka's registrar stamp also appears on its own unique layer, completely separate from any other data. No other data on that layer. Now, there is absolutely no method known to man by which an automatic scan of that document into a computer or into a scanning machine and then into a computer can possibly produce separate stamps on separate layers in that way from a document in which those stamps were already there. It simply can't be done. So what is the inference from what I have described to you about the electronic aspects rather than the visible aspects of this document? The answer I put it to you is that this document was fabricated piece by piece electronically. There really is no other conclusion that I can find that is simpler than that. Because if you had wanted simply to do what their chain of custody says they did, then you wouldn't have to go through any of these hoops. You'd simply take the image, shove it on the scanner in the White House, download the file onto a computer, scale it down maybe with Macintosh previews to get it down to 370 kilobytes, make it into a PDF, you all know how to do that, and bang it out on the web. None of this processing and messing around with layers and taking the registrar stamp. Literally, you can take that layer with the registrar stamp on it, you can move it around, you can turn it upside down, you can flip it the wrong way around if you like. There's no way that a legitimate scan could possibly have allowed that to happen. Now, there will be by this stage a rather obvious question in your mind, and that is, how could anybody be so utterly crass as to put up on the White House website a document as manifestly, obviously, in your face forged as this one? Well, welcome to Murphy's Law. And here I am going from what we know to what I am going to infer from the circumstances. And this is, therefore, speculation. That's what an inference is. I think what happened is they were panicked because an opinion poll a few days previously, 2 days previously, had shown that 62% of the American population didn't believe that President Obama was President Obama. They didn't believe he was born in Hawaii. Now, of course, in all conscience, anyone who doesn't believe that somebody complies with the constitutional requirement of being born within the territory and jurisdiction of the United States, they couldn't vote for it. So plainly, this is why it mattered to President Obama to sort this matter out. And so they rushed to sort all this out. Within days, they'd gone to Hawaii, they'd got the certificate, they'd come back with it, and then they'd obviously, of course, started with a file that they'd taken from the document, if it was a legitimate document. And then they'd play with it. Well, you wouldn't play with it. You wouldn't need to. So I think what happened was, this was in fact quite a well-prepared forgery that had taken some time to put together. I actually pretty much know who it was that did it. There is internal evidence in the document that reveals this, and I can't, for the moment, say who I think it is. But what I can say is this, that if this document is a forgery, then we cannot necessarily accuse the President of perpetrating or playing any part in that forgery. Yes, in the press conference he made a statement saying, we have put out today further information on my site of birth. But that is not to say that he knew this document to be a forgery. Because he, like me, we have this in common, you know, was born at the age of 0. And the trouble with that is you don't actually really know quite what's going on around you. And so I can't tell you that I wasn't born in Hawaii. And for the same reason, I don't think we can necessarily hold it against President Obama that a forged document has appeared on his website. He may not have known about this. There is no proof that he has done anything wrong here. And I want to make that very plain in view of some remarks that you may have heard elsewhere on this subject.